perspectives on the future of art and what art can mean in the time that we now live. So this is going to be a stream of consciousness video about the purpose of art in general and how it can move forward in this new century, which we now find ourselves 16 years into, and wow, half of my life really has been in this new century. So I've lived half, or existed for half of this last century and the new century. Obviously, I guess that would put me roughly in the category of a millennial, as it's called, I guess. So I've lived half within. Yeah, we did find that. Carry on. Purpose of art always has been question, an unanswered question, basically. A question of no answer. So, and an endless, I'd say on a more deeper level, more philosophical, an intense questioning of everything, and without really prompting an answer. Now, of course, obviously, sometimes questions can be very superficial, or in some contemporary art forms and even modern art forms, if you look back at it, it can be a very superficial, just aping of the culture, I guess, or the mass culture that is in the present society. A lot of this comes from the more modern conception, comes from Warhol, I guess. In that, by which I mean, and to be fair, some of Warhol's art, I suppose, could be read as a critique of the society he was living in, but most of it was just kind of taking recognition of the fact of the consumer society at that time, and then just expressing it in the same way, I guess. The Dadaists, I think, were much more interesting. So, in a very difficult time of history, obviously the First World War, the reactions to the First World War, and therefore the Dadaists were creating pure, creative, chaotic reactions. I mean, it was the start, I guess, of the idea that life has no inherent meaning, and just escape into a surrealistic meaninglessness, even nihilism in some senses. So that's history, that's 20th century. Obviously I had abstract expressionism as well, which is a predominantly New York based idea of art, or philosophy, I guess, of art, which is very much the idea that art had to be a personal expression, and obviously trying to expand on the expressionists' insights into what art was, which was unveiling the artist's personal perspective or personal experience of reality was more important than representing reality itself, i.e. just a kind of concrete world. It's kind of very sensory art form, expressionism, I think. I'm drawn aesthetically to expressionism, I guess, in terms of expressionism, and obviously there's impressionism as well, but I'm going to try and make this video too rambling and long. So, to the question of 21st century, obviously now at this point in time we live in a very multicultural society, a lot of different ideas floating around. Some respects an existential position that we have in society at the minute of there being many different cultures, many different ideas or ideals of what art can do. So I think the challenge now is, how do we move art forward without becoming a monoculture, I guess, basically. Monoculture being because that's limiting, and it's monoculture is just what echo chamber is, as the buzzword is, I guess, at present. So the question is, how do we not become a monoculture but also keep evolving forward, I guess, without, just retreating into monoculture and, at worst, a kind of racist interpretation of art and its purpose, by which I mean, it's probably a provocative way to put it, but how do we not retreat into that kind of, my culture is correct and all other cultures are incorrect is not a word, but are wrong. Obviously, I think part of this is developing a futurist philosophy to our culture, which can sustain the existence of many different cultures and, in a way, almost synthesize them, I guess, which has obviously happened a lot in history. So the Expressionists and Picasso, what they did was they took from African art and tribal art and synthesized them into a new modernist perception. So what I'm essentially talking about here is, again, is the conflict between postmodernism and modernism. Modernism was a movement in the 20th century mostly, where it emerged of a lot of questioning and deconstruction, I guess, of perceived ideas that were around the 20th century, starting with the deconstruction of language of Eliot, and deconstruction of form as well, actually, with the Expressionists, the Cubists, etc. That's all part of modernism. So it happened in poetry and writing with T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, and in art with Picasso and Cubist, all kind of emerged at the same time. Cubism kind of took on board the discoveries of Einstein, i.e. the relativity, and some things from cinema. I think I'm doing this based on a documentary I saw, which is quite interesting on the subject, which I'll try and link to if I can find it. But in terms of where next, the bigger question, it has to take on board the flux and the internal movement, I guess, of all the different energies which are happening in society at this time, and create something new out of it. Relating this to Marx, you got Marxist idea of thesis and antithesis, which I think also comes from Hegel. I'm not sure because I've not read that deep into it. Of thesis and antithesis is, you have two opposing ideas or ideals which come into conflict, but then create something new out of that. By which I mean the ideal of exchanging ideas, or there being two opposing ideas, out of that tension and conflict becomes to a new idea or a new ideal or a new understanding. So just trying to relate this to some of the work we've been doing with the tunnel. So we've done a zine called Understanding is Not a Point of View, which I guess is kind of putting that, or paraphrasing it into a title of the zine. I wrote a piece for that called The Artist Engineer, which is about my conception of the ideal. And it is an ideal, obviously, because it's not, nothing in life is perfect. And ideals by their very nature are ideals. They're perfect descriptions, or descriptions of ideals. The artist engineer idea I put forward there, proposition was, we have to, as artists, if we want to really create a new culture or drive culture forward, is we have to synthesize and take on board the developments of technology, because we have become increasingly an information society, and for even the younger generation than me now, because I'm 30 now, they are having to deal with information in a way that even my generation, which is the first kind of internet generation, didn't have to do. By which I mean, information is out there, all knowledge is out there on the internet through the shared communication network that the previous generation developed mostly, and then my generation have kind of accelerated the development of and been involved in, and I've been involved in that myself as a web developer and a web designer, and learning development tools developer, I guess. Another question is, where next to Columbus, I guess. So what new frontiers are there to be discovered? Like I was saying, I think even without wanting to sound over the top, my generation, which is the millennials, and well, I'm arguing pre-millennial, but that's all by the by. Part of our responsibility now is to develop and teach how to interpret the discourse of the existing age that we live in and how to develop it forward. I realise this is quite a rambling video probably, but this is quite a complex subject, so forgive me if I'm going off topic a bit. So yeah, a positive futurism. That, I think, is the only way we can really develop. And by a positive futurism, I mean almost utopian in your thinking. Because the only way you can create a new ideal is to create an ideal, which can obviously be critiqued from a pessimistic viewpoint easily, but that's kind of what you got to do, I'm afraid. So it doesn't mean having a lot of optimism about the human beings' potential. And relating this back to art, art's job is always to critique and be fearless in the face of tyranny, I guess. Best example of this for me is Picasso's Guernica in the 20th century, which, you know, the rise of the totalitarian right, you know, Picasso reacted to that at exactly the right time when it needed to be done. And obviously it wasn't just Picasso. There's no point beating around the bush. Like Miro was involved in a lot of anti-fascist art. A lot of different artists were involved in reacting to the rise of, you know, what ultimately became the most totalitarian regime of the 20th century, along with Soviet communism, of course. And I think sometimes Soviet communism gets too easy a ride, actually, with when people critique society. Soviet communism was just as totalitarian in its own way as Nazi fascism, and I think we've kind of eventually, on the left, got to the point now where most people who consider themselves of the left and the progressive kind of fields of thought agree on that. Sadly, not all, somehow, but most. So, I mean, a lot of the new conflicts I feel will be between forces of a constructive freedom with futurist underpinning and this kind of totalitarian, backwards-looking, regressive element that's within both the left and the right, actually, to be honest. We've obviously got the rise of the alt-right now, and that is extremely worrying. And it is quite a broad church in its own way, I suppose, as well, from what I know of the alt-right. But then it has kind of got this very, again, it's regressive in the right-wing sense of regressive. But then you've also got the rise on the left for regressive kind of retreat into complete 100% identity politics, where one's cultural identity becomes more important than an ideal or a you know, a positive kind of vision. This can be exampled in if you look online, there's a conception of the social justice warrior, which is someone who is purely concerned with activism, which is always useful, but they just become entrenched in identity politics, which again I think just leads to division, actually, to be honest, and it actually paradoxically goes against what the left is supposed to be about and its ideal, which is not collectivism per se, but communal values. Obviously, collectivism was kind of mutated a lot in the 20th century. The extreme of that becoming the Soviet Union, Mao's China, intellectual conformity, and anti-intellectualism actually a lot in the Soviet Union. So in the Soviet Union you had very much an anti-intellectual strain to that, and certain regimes of it, and especially to Stalin obviously. But it became almost a crime to question the prevailing communist order of the state and Stalin's word. So how are we going to go forward? And let me frame this in a newer way, because obviously we've got Trump, who's in power now in America, who represents very much a regressive right-wing deviation of, and almost like a kind of just a return to the most regressive opinions of women, his just the way he presents himself. I mean, there's literally been a speech where he said, "I can do anything, and they'll still vote for me." And I kind of understand why. I don't understand, but I can understand analytically the reasons why America's gone for Trump, which is, as far as I can see, it's America's fearful of the rise of Islamic fascism, like represented by ISIS, which I quite agree is a very scary trend that seems to be developing of extreme forms of religion. So yeah, and also I think a lot of Americans are very annoyed at the political establishment, and this is probably more of a worldwide trend as well. I'm going a bit off track now, but art has to exist outside of all that, I feel. It doesn't mean it is non-apolitical, because politics and life, personal is political, I guess, to put it into a cliched left-wing term that I think most people who are viewing this video will understand. But art cannot be apolitical at all times. That's an impossibility. So the main thing for art to do is to develop a mature relationship to the political and a critique at all times. And any situation where artists are limited in being able to pursue that critique in whatever direction they wish to pursue it, because obviously it's an individualistic pursuit, art, it can be nothing but an intellectual individualistic and intellectual pursuit. And wherever, I mean, even looking at the most extreme example from 20th century, who do they come for first? In the 20th century, the intellectuals and the artists, basically. The thinking people and the artists were probably the first victims of Hitler's madness, I guess. Same with the Soviets. And we're not near that situation yet. I'm not even suggesting that. But it has the potential to go in that rather worrying direction. So, as artists and thinking people, our duty is always to question the prevailing order, keep it on its toes. And art's job, I think even more now, actually, given the current situation of how we've got the extreme ideologues of religion, extreme religion, and the extreme ideologues of political power coalescing, our job becomes even more important to critique that intelligently and with dignity and with the keeping the highest ideals alive, which to me are compassion, love, a belief in a better future, and a remembrance of our shared divinity from the stars and the universe. And also that's a way out of the meaninglessness of, as is sometimes perceived within existential philosophy. We have a shared origin, which is literally the universe. And in the next 200 years, our major aim as a human race, I feel, is not the conquering of space, but the exploration of space, creating new colonies, and allowing the mind that we are to grow, continue growing, to explore. Star Trek, basically. But yeah, that's the way forward. Not a technological utopia, but a technological reality that is idealistic at its core and believes in the virtues of beauty. So that's my thoughts. Stream of consciousness with Blade Runner in the background, which seems quite appropriate, on how to progress art in our contemporary age. So thank you for watching if you've been watching. Don't tend to get many views on this channel still, so I'd appreciate more. Not for any reason other than just to share ideas, really, to be honest, and just try and increase people getting involved in this discussion around art and society, because I think it's very important for our progression and, on the more extreme light, for actual survival as a species. I need to I am doing this video here now, but I need to actually learn a bit more about permaculture at the minute. I've got a lot of friends who are involved in this permaculture. Don't know enough about it, but yeah, that's for another time. So thank you for watching if you have been. I've been Luar Vortex, and yeah, cheers.